Hey everyone, I just wanted to get back to you with some of my thoughts regarding clarification of a certain question I was asked. Um, the question had to do with cognitive constructs and how they relate to the rest of reality, the things that are not cognitive constructs, okay? For a demonstration, I've brought along a certain object, and it is this object in question. I'll hold it closer so you can get a good look, and you have a pretty good idea of what it is, okay? You've probably seen something like it before. Now I'm going to ask you, what would you call it? I'm going to guess you would call it an apple, and I would probably call it the same thing, okay? It's probably tasty and delicious, and I'll probably eat it later. So I'll find out. But the interesting problem arises around the phenomenon of the apple. Okay, is that apple, the one I just showed you, is this thing here the same as the last apple you ate? Well, no, this one's not in your stomach, or it hasn't been digested by your body yet. It's still right here in my hand. But how can we say that it is an apple then? Because the other thing was also an apple, and they're clearly not the same. If you consider it, they don't even look the same. Likely, probably, I'm going to hazard a guess that the last one you ate was red. And the archetype in your mind of an apple, the idea of an apple in your head, is probably also red. And just guessing, it could be green. It doesn't. I don't know. It could be turquoise if you're a little strange, but it doesn't really matter. The point is that this apple and the next apple and the apple in your head are all different. So how can we call them the same thing? They're quite clearly not. I'm going to address this problem by discussing two planes, the two planes of existence, what I call the two planes of existence, okay? And the two planes they're dependent on, you have to first understand the idea that the psyche is part of reality in order to understand completely the idea of the two planes of reality. The first plane of reality, I call it the first plane because, as far as we know, it's the foundation for the second, although it may not be. I don't claim to know what was happening before the beginning of the universe, okay? The first plane of reality is what I call the non-cognitive plane, or the no-thought plane. That is the plane which exists independently of your mind, in which all things which are not cognitive constructs exist, okay? The second layer of reality, the second plane, which is entirely based on the first plane, as far as we can tell, the second plane is called the cognitive plane. I'm just calling it that because, I don't know, it sounds kind of cool. Whatever, it doesn't matter. It's the second layer of reality in which we live our daily lives. In this layer, all cognitive constructs, all thoughts, our entire reality, the entire reality in which we live, is based. It's based right there in that cognitive plane. The cognitive plane gives rise to an interesting, the difference between the two, they're in fact the same reality, but they're two planes of reality, and they're different enough that we can divide them, even though they're not actually divided. The difference between the two planes of reality causes an interesting phenomenon, two interesting phenomena, actually. One is archetypes, and one is the inspiration or the model for the archetype. The archetype is the apple in this example, right? When I hold this up, you know it's not the same as the last apple you ate or the idea of an apple in your head. They're different things, right? So you call them the same thing because they're close enough. It's a very human thing to do to say, oh, it's similar enough, close enough, same thing, right? Like, oh, apples, oranges, they're all fruit, right? It doesn't matter. But they're actually different. All these archetypes are actually gross simplifications of their inspirations in the non-cognitive plane, okay? So the apple actually reflects a group of associated similar fruits, and well, actually they're not even fruits, because the fruit is another cognitive construct, and that reflects a group of organisms that are used for reproduction, and so on, right? All the cognitive constructs are either based on other cognitive constructs, or they are based on, the most fundamental cognitive constructs are based directly on approximations of inspirations in the non-cognitive plane. I know this sounds like a lot of jargon, so I'm going to give you some examples, okay? Maybe it'll make it a little simpler. I don't know if you've already understood what I'm talking about. I have no idea if you're following me or not. I might sound like a madman, but here's some examples to maybe make it a little simpler. Okay, the apple, again, it has its inspiration in a group of similar fruits, right? That are, and we say they're close enough, so we call them the same thing. Another example might be a car. One car is not the same as the next car. They're made of completely different materials. They're, in fact, not the same at all, but we consider them to be the same thing because they serve the same purpose, and because they have enough in common that we just don't care about the differences anymore, right? For another example, a great example is human beings. One human being is definitely and obviously not the same as the next human being. We give them all separate names. Every human being that I know of has a different name from another one, right? So how does that work? I mean, we clearly distinguish between them, but at the same time we lump them all into the same group. We say they're all people. They're all close enough. They're all human beings. They're all units. But the units are all different. Plus, I can almost guarantee that the archetypal image of a human being in your mind is not the same as the human you're going to meet on the street next time you step out the door. They're different. Because the archetypal image, the archetype of a human being in your mind, in the cognitive plane, I'm getting back to these because they're very useful to refer to later on. In the cognitive plane, the archetype for a human being is based on a real, an external, I mean, they're both real. The archetype and its inspiration are both real, but an external, a non-cognitive phenomenon, right? So the human archetype, this is a human being, is based on your observations of human beings, of what we would call human beings, a group of assorted, similar hominid creatures that we call human beings. Okay, we say these are all similar enough that they can be grouped under the same category. But the categorization is completely arbitrary. The line is non-existent unless you rise above the non-cognitive plane and go into the cognitive plane. The cognitive plane is where all distinctions rest, okay? So, with this idea of archetypes and their inspirations in mind, I'm going to come back to the idea of divinity. Divinity, as I mentioned in my last video, is a cognitive construct. It exists in the seat of divinity. The archetype for divinity is in the cognitive plane. It's in the realm of thought. Okay, the divine, but of course, like every other phenomenon in the cognitive plane, in the plane of thought, the realm of thought, like every other one, it has a concrete non-cognitive basis. Okay, I'm not going to use the word real because the archetype is, of course, real. I established that in my first talk. Okay, the archetype is real just as its inspiration is real, but they're not the same thing. Okay, our idea of divinity, most people's idea of divinity, is it has a concrete non-cognitive basis, and what that basis is this: the whole totality of everything, the unity that is the entirety, with humanity at its center. Because humanity is the center of our universe. So it belongs at the center in our perception. So we take the entirety of everything, we put man at the center, and that becomes our model for divinity. Now we have the archetype of divinity in our mind. And that is why, because man is at the middle, the center in our minds, that is why you have the phenomenon of anthropomorphic gods. You have a god who is ultimately transcendent, but who still has biases. Like in some religions, he might not like homosexuality, or in others, he may abhor the consumption of meat. But in reality, animals eat meat. I mean, in the non-cognitive plane, animals eat meat. And there are homosexuals. So an omnipotent, transcendent deity doesn't have these biases. Okay? But the archetypal model in our mind does, because it is based on our observations of humanity and on the universe as a whole. Okay, so those are just my thoughts. If you need any clarification or anything like that, because I know that's confusing, leave a question. I'll try and answer it as best I can. As for the rest, just have a good winter break and enjoy the weather. Peace.